Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Very happy to be here. From the Institute of International Finance, we are very pleased to be part of the FinTech Festival for the third time. It's quite an impressive event. It keeps getting bigger with every edition. We, for this afternoon, wanted to talk about unlocking the value of data. Overcoming the barriers. I think data has been the one word that has been repeated over and over in every single panel, intervention, keynote during this event. Many people refer to data as the new oil. And one of the issues that we're going to discuss today is how to unlock the value of that data that in many cases resides within financial institutions, but because of many barriers, including legacy systems, it's been quite a challenge for financial institutions to unlock the value of that data. But speaking of that, I guess the first area where you really need to focus is unlocking the value of that data with customer centricity. So I'm actually going to start with Peter and ask you, people keep talking about meeting customer expectations. How do we think of that in the digital age?
So I think there's a really profound transformation that's just really beginning. Because of the rich world of data that we can now capture, understand, analyze, and create a 360-degree view of the customer, we can move from the era of B2C to B2I. And by B2I, I mean the individual, a full picture of the individual, as opposed to a kind of narrow slice of thinking of them only as the consumer. And, people don't want to do financial transactions. They want to do things. They want to go on vacation. They want to go on, they want to pay their kids' tuition. They want to buy a home. All that financial service ought to be happening in the background to enable them to do the things they want to do as an individual. And so banks in the future, I think, now need to begin to think about their customers as fully rich individuals with all those capabilities and enabling them to do what they want to do so they don't have to think about finance, that finance is operating in the background, enabling them to do what they want to do.
And how is data central to that?
Well, that picture, to build up that 360 requires data from many sources, right? It isn't one single slice of data. It is from the bank. It is from healthcare. It's from telecommunications. It's from the great variety of different kinds of activities. You rightly said data is the new oil. I actually think of Amazon as the Saudi Arabia of data these days, right? Or maybe it could also be Alibaba. They're right in there together in that respect.
Right.
But it is the ability to integrate across many different sources of data to create that 360-degree view of the customer.
Right. Roman, let me go to you and ask you, BNY Mellon, and I've heard you saying before, it's all about the physical, but also the digital. How is that influencing how you think about moving forward and transforming technologically your institution?
Yeah, we're 234 years old. So clearly, we've been through multiple cycles of innovation, even before the oil, and clearly before the data. So when I talk about digital and physical coexisting, of course we have fundamental changes in the ecosystem, fundamental changes in customer expectations, in our clients' expectations, everywhere around the world. But ultimately, the physical element doesn't go away.
Right.
In our personal consumer lives, it absolutely doesn't help you if you do everything great online, and then 3 weeks later, something physical doesn't arrive.
Right.
You mentioned Amazon. Is the value in a front end or is the value in distribution system? And the front end is actually easier. We all know that. The distribution system is harder. So linking to your point about the data, that's what data does. It links, the front end, with the distribution system, and that's where physical comes in. So fundamentally for us, the digital and physical need to be linked together. The way we provide service to our clients, the way we move money around the world.
Matt, a lot of what you're doing is finding new ways, new technologies to leverage that data. Tell us about what are you looking into and how do you see sort of the big opportunities?
Yeah, so basically we are looking at customer expectations from the context of a macro trend that's happening. That basically it's about blurring all the typical dichotomies online versus offline, physical versus virtual. They don't really exist anymore. Everything is becoming digital. And you can argue that perhaps the only real dichotomy nowadays is more between human and machines. So within that context, I think that there are, well, I can focus in three different areas that I think that in the short term they will go through major disruptions or change. The first is data, of course. I think that in the last 5 to 10 years, it was kind of the big data era where we were very much focused as businessmen and as technologists to build technology to deal with the scale and speed of data. I think that for the next 5 to 10 years, we will be more worried about a qualitative problem rather than a quantitative problem, which is data ownership. Customers expect to own their data, they expect to understand what their companies are doing with their data, and they expect to participate in the benefit that their data generate. Second is AI. I think that as happened with mobile, we're going to a world where the products are going to be AI first product, meaning that if they don't use the AI they're basically useless or valueless. Right. And the last one, probably the most disruptive for this audience, for the fintech industry, is trust. Money is basically based on trust. The whole financial system is based on trust. The hundreds of years that this bank has was built and based on trust. And I think that this new technology that just appeared 10 years ago, blockchain, is basically going to change that. In blockchain systems, trust emerges from mathematical and game theoretical systems that basically changes how we produce and manage trust. So this opens us a huge new set of questions to, well, what's there for banks? Can we separate banks from trust? Or can we expect consumers not to trust a bank and still find value in it?
Right. Can I add something to that? Because I think it's really, what you said is critically important. And that is that I think people really want personalized services, but they will only accept them if there's trust. If they trust the providers of services, the organizers of data, and particularly if they feel like they have control themselves.
Yeah.
So I think you're onto something critically important.
Yeah, but the key insight here is that that's one branch. The other branch of all these possible futures is that customers can expect trust less.
Well, I think I would build on that. I think the customers expect actually trust more. I think the way it arrives is different than it used to arrive before. You know, the reason I mentioned kind of a long history, because I do agree with you that the definition of who is to be trusted and how to trust people is changing. And I think clearly with advances of technology, we're enabling different ways to check people. We're enabling different ways to run trust around yourself and actually establish your own personal ecosystem in a way that you don't need to depend on somebody else's.
Exactly.
And that's, in some ways, you become a provider of your own trust, you become a provider of your own data.
So for any of you, yesterday, Carlos Torres and Bill Winters really emphasized this point, that the way banks are going to be able to compete in the future is leveraging the trust that they have been able to build through all their years of existence, right? That if there is one key differentiating factor is banks have been able to build that trust in their customers. Arrival of new technology, the trust issues that security, etc., is that undermining that trust, or is it how can banks build on that trust that they've been able to build throughout their years of existence?
I mean, look, ultimately, we've been around trust all this time, and the definition of trust have changed. And the reason I talk about kind of physical and digital at the same time, I'm the head of digital. People expect me to talk about all the new technologies, but the only way these technologies worked if they embedded into the client's expectations, embedded in a key client's process, they embedded in client's life. So I agree with that. So in terms of our agenda, we look at 3 digital horizons. The first one is basically digitizing everything that people do today.
Right.
There are a lot of things that are very manual, physical, that absolutely should be digitized, and we kind of all in on that. The second one, I think it's kind of touches on what you mentioned, is basically we're reimagining the way clients work with us, the way clients conduct their own business. And when people talk end-to-end, they usually talk about kind of their own end-to-end.
Right.
In our eyes, end-to-end is the client's end to the world's end, right? And that's where the data comes in, because it's our data, it's client's data, it's the world's data, traffic data, insights, all put together. That's what creates, very different products and services.
Right, right.
And the last one is kind of what we call digital ecosystem. That's where we work with kind of my colleagues to the left and anybody else in the world to really create different products and services. But that ecosystem is centered around client, and obviously the trust comes in, and that's where clients look at us.
So that's a great segue into the next session, which is really unlocking the power of that data within banking organizations. So let me go to you, Peter, and talk about, are there any specific examples of new technologies that are allowing banks to do this?
Sure. Look, I think we can already see the beginning of the next platform. We've been spending a lot of time thinking about that. And today's smartphone, if you think about, right, I don't know how, I assume there's no one in the audience who isn't equipped with one of these today, right? Couldn't live without it. But think back to the BlackBerry, right? How funky the BlackBerry was compared to the iPhone, right? But it gave you a hint of what was to come. And today, Amazon, Alexa, Google Home, Siri give you a hint of what's to come. Within about 5 years, everyone will have a personal digital assistant. That digital assistant will have the job of managing your own data, giving permission to others to use that data, interacting with a complex ecosystem, and actually being my avatar in that world, my digital avatar, that enables me to interact with other digital services. Right. So everyone will now have a personal digital assistant that will interact with that environment out there. And that, I think, is the next platform.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, I want to challenge that vision.
Okay.
No, basically, I think that I foresee that vector kind of unfolding, but I don't want that to happen, actually, because I think that it's the wrong stack and it's the wrong relationship model. So whenever a big provider, Google, Amazon, comes and say, hey, I hold all your data, I run algorithms that you have no accountability, no transparency what you're doing, and you expect me to create trust around that, and put expectations, I don't want to see that. So what I think that there is a huge change and a huge potential is in shifting that model and making AI work for me in my data, but not on their service, on my own. So let me finish. So the basic idea here is when you have like a relationship for, say, customer service, to use an example, a bank puts a AI to work on a chatbot with your data to provide you services. One machine dealing with end humans. I don't like that. I want to deal with humans. If you throw me a machine, I will throw you my machine. So that's what I want. I want AI working for me. No, Google working, providing a service to me. So
Matt,
alter ego AI.
So land that, how to do it?
Me?
Well,
yes. So basically, I think that there is a new stack unfolding, which is blockchain working on a peer-to-peer decentralized service. When you hold your data on your, just to give you a concrete example, your data on your phone encrypted, an AI running on your phone, so you can say that this AI assistant is your assistant.
Right.
Knows you
and
represents
you,
you, and you have full accountability, not Google doing that.
So
I think that's the key.
So I think that is the right vision. That is what I'm suggesting, that you control your own
absolutely.
data, you control your own digital assistant, it interacts with that larger system. And you said something critically important, transparency and the ability to inspect the data and the algorithms. We've established an Office of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology precisely around that issue, because we think it's critical. You won't achieve the trust unless you actually give people access to the sources of data and the algorithms that use the sources.
Yeah, I think the magic trick here is to use the world's data but make that your own. Our clients that set against us selling their data, they absolutely want to embrace a scenario where the world's data comes to them. So I'm actually kind of close at the math in this one, that in a sense, you as a client, whether that's a consumer or a large business, want to be in possession of your data. Right. That doesn't mean you don't want your data to be intermingled with somebody else's data to create the insights. Yeah. And I think the technology allows us to create unique insights for each particular client. And we work in a way of ecosystem, and we always have been. There is no client that have a single provider for everything. So we work with them, and then we, creating, a value chain of different providers. So somebody going to provide data, somebody else going to provide an algorithm, somebody provides robots or humans.
Right.
But it's ultimately, on behalf of the client that, this ecosystem being created, not on behalf of, a provider, Google, or anybody else in the world.
So,
yep.
Matt.
Yeah, no, and catching up with that, I think that there is the other opportunity for banks leveraging that trust and leveraging that relationship that they have with their customers. I think that the interesting angle for me is that people trust banks their money, and that's very important for people. Okay, and the other fact is that money is very similar to data. So banks have the opportunity to move from being trusted entities that manages financial assets to be trusted entities that manages data assets.
Right.
And that bridge is a narrative that you can tell and people can understand. So I think that this is the right way to leverage trust, data, and the relationship that the banks have.
So another of the themes from yesterday was this discussion about the difference between data ownership, which is how traditionally financial institutions used to think about it, to data access. So it's not so much about owning the data, but being able to access it. But there are different factors that influence the ability of banks to access data. There is a lot of discussion about data flows coming out from the banks to third parties, not so much from the third parties to the banks. So can I get you to comment on that, Peter?
Well, look, I think here we get into regulation.
Yes.
Right? Because, of course, this is really one of the great issues with respect to data sharing, right? What are the boundaries of what one is permitted to do? And I think here we have GDPR in Europe. We've just passed a law in California. There are
open banking.
Here. Yeah, so I think beginning to develop a kind of coherent regulatory framework, particularly at national level or regional level as it is in Europe, I think is absolutely critical to being able to actually make that happen.
Right. So let's go to the next and last session. Roman, we're talking about banks being able to keep pace with technological transformation. So how big of a challenge is that for a, again, 234-year-old financial institution?
Look, I think the question actually surprises me. To be very honest, I ask it all the time, so I'm not surprised you ask it here. But, our whole mission is to keep the pace.
Yes.
And, we've been doing that for a very long time. I don't see technology companies coming to a banking space. I see technology companies being our partners because the things that we used to do ourselves, we actually have somebody else doing that. So when I talk about this ecosystem, when my colleagues talk about trust, which obviously, that's what we build around, that centers around client, it centers around us. So I'm embracing, fintechs, I'm embracing, large companies to be part of this ecosystem, which helps us.
Big techs as well?
Oh, big techs as well, of course. I absolutely see that all these people are our allies because ultimately we're about trust, we're about being global, we're about being local while being global. We're about really thinking about the client's end-to-end journey, not just a portion of the value chain.
This discussion about people coming to eat your lunch, that's not happening?
No, I think it could be happening if we were complacent. Right. That's what I said. It's a good question, but I'm surprised. And clearly, my kind of whole mission is to really build this ecosystem and to improve kind of our own, processes and systems, but also to embrace the world and embrace the data around the world and do that around us and around our clients.
So, Peter, how essential is the cloud for this mission?
could do it without the cloud, right? I mean, you can't do the kind of thing we're now talking about without cloud computing. If everybody was living in their own data centers, highly isolated from each other, with no capacity to integrate across a great variety of services, we wouldn't be in the world we're living in. If you start thinking about all the things like voice-related services, the new kind of intelligence that's being used, the applications of AI, all of that depends upon cloud computing. So, that is central to making this all happen.
But this is not happening without barriers or challenges. Can you talk a little bit of
Well, I
some
think
of
the
those
real
barriers?
issue there, again, the biggest barrier is regulation. And so here, I think the issue is educating the regulators, right? That they have to get comfortable. They're necessarily conservative. They don't want to take risks. So I think they're learning. And what we're seeing is over time, in most places, the regulation is moving in a direction that facilitates the evolution of the services.
Right. So if I can make a plug for some of the analysis and research that the IIF has been doing, we have been saying that the biggest risk with the cloud is not being able to move to the cloud.
Well, look, Ravi Menon's speech yesterday was a perfect example of what I'm talking. Ravi's obviously a very progressive regulator in a very conservative country, doing it exactly right in that respect. He talked, for example, about data localization and the challenges that that presents and how that inhibits the kind of integration that we're talking about. So I think you can have very conservative regulation that is very rigorous and still be progressive in the way that Singapore has already begun to move. This event itself is a perfect example.
Right.
I think the world talks about this dilemmas and dichotomies that don't really exist, like physical versus cloud, global versus local. I think the answer becomes and in many of these things. It has to be global and you have to be local.
Right.
I think you have to offer clients complete security, ability to see the data, to see the algorithms, and you can do that in a virtual way. So that's, in my mind, there is a lot of talk about these dilemmas because we just didn't get to solve them. But ultimately, it's a physical and digital, as I talked about. It's physical and digital. It's intertwined.
Matt, new technologies. What are sort of the key enablers of for banks keeping pace with transformation?
Oh. So trying to resonate with what we've been discussing here, I see that all these regulations like Singapore, EU, United States now catching up, I do see a trend there. And for me, the way that I read that trend is that ownership of personal data is going to become a fundamental human right. That's where I see that's
well
going.
said.
Right. On the other hand, and that's why I'm so bullish about a project that I own, Wibson, check it out. But in general, about all these technologies that allows you to control your data, be more transparent, and have more accountability, and so on. And well, I'm very obsessed now about this thing, which I will share with you, which is there is an economic reason why this makes sense, why personal data ownership makes sense, and it's pretty weird actually. So the fundamental insight is the following. So data is basically unrivaled, meaning that your personal data, your credit card transactions can be used, bought by all the companies in the world simultaneously, and it cannot be depleted. Okay? So that fact is a very strange feature of an object. Okay? You can't just deplete it. And because of that, companies are very afraid of that disruption that it can create, of that creative destruction. So basically what they're doing is they're holding on their data. They don't let people access their data. If you look at what Google or Facebook are doing, data is their actual moat, is their competitive advantage. It's not their AI. That's why they give AI to everybody. Okay? So, but that fact of they're not sharing their data, even when it cannot be depleted, generates very bad inefficiencies in the economy, because that data could be used for many other reasons, even for data for social good. So let me finish. The great thing is, like, you can prove that if you give data ownership to consumers, the allocation will be much more beneficial to the economy.
But let me challenge that. Just to say, is the customer, I mean, we see so much unwittingly sort of giving up of the data by the customer. So are you saying the customers can be responsible in,
yes,
in the consumer?
The way that it's more efficient, it's because you, as a consumer, can balance the trade-off between privacy concerns and how much economic gains you want to get from your data.
Right. Roman?
I agree with Matt, but I'll put a little bit different angle on that. I think, and that's why I told you that I'm not concerned with technology companies, because our competitive advantage is actually the client. And therefore, we actually align with the client in terms of how they want to use the data.
Right.
They want the data about the world. They want the data, the aggregate data about many things that are happening, kind of used together with their data. That doesn't mean they need to release sort of the equivalent of the credit card transaction.
Right.
But they want to obtain the information about the world, and that's kind of where we put them first, as opposed to have somebody who is hoarding this data.
Peter?
So, yeah, I strongly agree with what Matt said. We talk about what we call the personal data economy, right? In today's world, other people are capturing your data and getting the value from it. You don't get it.
Right.
And what we're seeing is a new generation of what you could call data brokers of various sorts, intermediaries that do three things. First of all, they take the data and make it useful.
Right.
They sell it to people who want to use it. They protect your identity because they anonymize that data and then provide value for you as a consumer or customer, as an individual, for that data. So we've seen, for example, MoviePass was an example of that. A company in the UK called Controlio that's a personal RFP company that enables you to essentially anonymously request create RFPs for any service you want to do. So there's going to be a whole new layer of companies, and I think many of the fintechs here are perfect examples of exactly what I'm talking about, that are data intermediaries, capturing the data, making sense of it, selling it on to people who want to use it, and providing value to the source of that data.
Right. So, but financial institutions, banks, for example, do they add value to that data and then makes that data proprietary to the bank, or are we always thinking that is the customer's data and the customer owns it?
It is the customer's data, but if they've given it to the bank to use, then the bank is free, obviously, to use for providing services to them of value to them.
But ultimately, to add value to the customer.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
Roman?
I mean, it's a narrow path, right? If you protect the data too much, then you cannot provide insights. If you don't protect the data at all, you have a lot of insights, there is no privacy.
Yes.
So that's why those who actually support this narrow path that actually allows client to have trust, confidence, safety, and security, and yet allows them to access the insights, get to win. And, this is your question, how do you keep the pace? That's how you keep the pace.
Yeah.
In the old days, people used to keep their own records, right? If you were well organized, you had a file drawer with files of your banking and healthcare and your tax records and so on. If you weren't, you had a shoebox crammed with paper and so on. But we've passed that point, and now we have the tools to do that in a very coherent way and to give that control in exactly the same ways back to the individual, but with much more powerful capabilities associated with that box of files you couldn't do anything with.
Matt, parting thought, the last minute. Are banks, financial institutions in general, ready to face that challenge? You see them succeeding in the future?
Absolutely. I think that there are some that they are.
Some.
Yeah, some are. But I definitely see that there is a change in how banks are looking at these opportunities, and there is definitely the willing to at least question some of their fundamental values, like having these guys talking, especially here, about how they can rethink trust. I think this is mind-blowing.
Well, and this is a central theme of the festival. So with that, let me bring this panel to a conclusion. Please help me thank the panelists for this great discussion.